Welcome to the Growing Green Ventures podcast. First of all, I just want to thank you all for listening to these interviews, whether you stay for one or you listen to them all. It really means a lot to me. It's been a pleasure to be able to speak with all these accomplished individuals and these entrepreneurs and shine a light on their journeys and the impact that they've been able to have in their respective industries. You know, the purpose of this podcast is twofold. One is to dig deeper and ask these entrepreneurs the tough questions that I don't think usually are asked, right? The real impacts and risks of entrepreneurship and how they've impacted their personal lives, personal finances, and whatnot. And two, it's really to shine light on the opportunity that this ecological revolution has, right? Successful businesses are formed in addressing a real problem. And there really isn't a bigger problem than the climate crisis. Whatever industry that you're in, whatever domain that you have, there's an opportunity there to change something, whether it is to make something more circular, whether it means to create a product or service that has a lower environmental impact, to rethink the status quo of business as usual. And there isn't a bigger problem out there than the climate crisis. And that touches on every single facet of our society, of our economy, of the world around you, whether it be building electronics or building a fashion brand or whatever it is. All products, all systems, and all facets of society need to change in order to create a livable world, a truly sustainable world, right, in the future. Now, there are three main elements of each conversation that I focused on. One was business, personal development, and of course, sustainability. Now, starting with business, again, there's a big opportunity out there for business owners to transition, not just to transition from a linear economy to a circular one, where there's a reuse of materials at all stages of the value chain, as well as providing the same products and services to the consumers that we've come to rely on, right, in a way that doesn't pollute the environment, that doesn't emit excessive amounts of carbon, that doesn't destroy natural wildlife and the like. Sustainable products and services do not need to equate to a lesser product, which was, I guess, the reputation that a lot of these had 10, 15 years ago. But in fact, now the reality is quite the opposite. And we have advanced technologies that can create similar products in a much less environmentally degradatious way. So I think we need to really rethink collectively the ways that we do business as usual, simply put. Each and every one of the entrepreneurs that I spoke to is creating something of real value. And it's amazing to see each of their journeys come from where they were to where they are. One business that I think is really unique to highlight is David Cutler's Fortuna Cools, and the way that they're able to reuse a waste stream into and upcycle it into a consumer good, as well as addressing needs in different economies. I think David Cutler's Fortuna Cools is a perfect example of how a company and an individual can rethink a waste system and thinking about how can we use certain properties that it has into a new product and service that, again, not only reduces the impact of our waste, which is huge, or how can we create an existing product in a lower environmental manner. And it's these types of like killing two birds with one stone approach that I find really exciting and really invigorating. You know, the main issue for a lot of climate solutions now in terms of their adoption and scalability comes down to price. And that's a real challenge that entrepreneurs still have to solve for. I'm not trying to negate that. The status quo is so entrenched and has such economic advantages that price component is really is a main issue that a lot of these solutions have to being adopted by the masses. And I think that's really to anyone who's out there doing something, that is really your biggest challenge, right? How can I create this? You have an idea, you create this business, great. You put it into practice, amazing. How can you make it cost competitive with the competition if its differentiation is nothing but environmental impact? And I want to make a point that is super important in these discussions, and that business alone can't solve the climate crisis. Business alone is not going to solve the underlying issues that we have. It will take a collective approach on all fronts to adjust our society from one that pollutes the environment, destroys wildlife, and emits unsustainable amounts of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. That being said, business plays a huge part in it. And it's important to highlight organizations that are doing the real work to address this. Segueing into more of a sustainability component to it and the environmental component to it, we live in the built environment. all materials and components and products can be made in a way that is more sustainable and thoughtful, whether that be making something out of a regenerative agricultural feedstock like mycelium to make new bricks that revolutionize the building industry, or cornstarch to replace plastic packaging, or regenerative seaweed to create aquaculture products. The ways of addressing products input are an immense way. Thinking about how the inputs of a product can be altered in a way that is less carbon intensive, that is less fossil fuel based, that has a more organic end of life solution, are critical. At the same time, professional services is also very much important in this larger economy. So much of the economy is based on the tertiary sector. So providing knowledge in a specific sector and providing guidance to others who don't really know, like Matt Hawthorne's work at Qantas or Beto Bina's at Far Farm, really support the transition into a responsible business practice. Sustainability and addressing the climate crisis is a team sport. And so all players need to be working together and sharing knowledge to because it's not just there's no winner take all in the environment in this regard. At the same time, thinking about the end of life, right? Thinking about what will happen once that product is consumed and done with, once that brick in that building gets demolished, once that fishing bag gets used, what happens to it? Is it plastic that just ends up in a landfill? Is it going to be found in the ocean in 10 years? Who knows? But if you can think about that from a design perspective and find ways to either create something that is reusable, that is compostable or biodegradable, or can be involved in a take-back system to be more circular in nature. And of course, that touches on more like systemic issues of the systems at play. I talk to companies all day about their environmental goals and their circularity agenda, and I something that's always missing in these conversations is sort of the macro, right? If things can be recycled, if things can be composted, how does the consumer get it from where they are at the end of life to the position that it is reused, that it does get recycled, that it does get composted? And that's really where I think it falls a bit more on the government to put into play this infrastructure for the take-back programs, for the responsible compostability initiatives. Just here in New York City, a few years ago, the city mandated composting availability for buildings over a certain threshold. So now we're seeing popping up the brown bins for composting and these sort of citywide composting bins, which is a great initiative and a great step in the right direction, right? But again, that's a government initiative. It's not put on necessarily Whole Foods and whatnot. You see these instances where like TerraCycle puts a recycling bin for hard to recycle materials in a retail store. You see these products that proudly proclaim their recyclability, but it requires the consumer to take the product back to the store and store drop-off recycling initiatives only, and those are just so ineffective. Once you make it hard to find the right end-of-life solution, it's a losing streak. And I think you see a lot of these companies who try to have these take-back programs, or build a material, put all this money into creating a product that can be recycled, easily recyclable, mono-material based stuff, but the infrastructure isn't really there. And I think that this is where this weight should be shouldered by government. Obviously, it should be funded by corporations and the right and responsible tax systems that we don't necessarily have. But the systems that address the end-of-life solution need to be more ubiquitous and not on the shoulders of any individual single company per se. What I'm trying to highlight in this podcast is how people are leveraging their natural skills, their authentic voices, their actual interests to create something of value. It's not just about, there's no one size fits all. There's business opportunities and for everyone to feel fulfilled and accomplished and sort of reach their higher potential while addressing a serious issue, right? Creating bridges and enabling spaces for further connection and conversation, like Miranda Massey's Climate Museum. Create environments for deeper conversation and education that is desperately needed for climate justice and for furthering this agenda, right? Similar to Jordana's fashion innovation. The way that I like to look at sustainability is the fact that all of humanity, we're on this collective ship, right? In the middle of the sea. But the ship is on fire now. And there are other issues on the ship, the way that the captain speaks to the sergeant and whatnot. But at the end of the day, the ship is on fire. Everyone needs to drop what they're doing and put that fire out. Otherwise, everyone will sink and die and drown. and we're that ship. And that's how, and that's the type of prioritization that the climate crisis should have across the entire board. I do think there's a hierarchy of responsibility when it comes to this. And at the top, I envision this of a pyramid for our society, and at the top of it are citizens, right? Is a collection of individuals, and one individual's actions may not do much, right? One individual's action may just be a literal drop in the bucket, but nevertheless, individuals and the ways that we go about our day to day will need to change. If you can, you should recycle. If you can, you should compost. You should say no to that extra plastic package or extra plastic utensils when you get takeout and the like. But of course, this isn't on you, and I would never pretend that individual action alone will get us past this point. It's much more structural. But that doesn't mean that certain components of citizens' lives that we get are accustomed to will have to change. Every component of society needs to change in some which manner. Further down this hierarchy list and this pyramid is the private sector and private organizations, right? This is the manufacturers, this is energy producers, this is capitalism, right? These are the institutions that are making things and do emit the majority of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere and pollute our environment and all of the components of the climate crisis in one. And these are the individuals that need to be changing the fastest, changing the most, because they're the ones that are doing the most direct impact, let's say. And then on the other hand, you have governments who sort of set the playing field for which all the facets of society can operate within. And it's upon the responsibility of government to set the policies for which the private sector can play within. Policy will always sort of lag innovation in a way. That's a pattern of behavior that we've seen time and time again and throughout history. Nevertheless, it's on the responsibility of government to create the policy that mandates responsible business operations, mandates responsible business practices and systems, and of course sets the playing field for the infrastructure that allows citizens to do the right thing, to compost, to recycle, and whatnot. So, all of these three facets need to change somehow. Finally, of course, we have the concept of personal development, right, which is so intrinsic to entrepreneurship in general. One thing that's been super clear about speaking to all these individuals is that they've really just doubled down and owned their strengths, right? Find what they're good at and find what they're interested in. Listen to that inner voice, to go that extra mile, to take that emotional leap that is required to really do something outside of the norm. I think we think about entrepreneurship from the side of the Mark Zuckerbergs, the Elon Musks, the Bill Gates of the world, the people who have already accomplished success, and then we look back on what they've done, and it makes sense, right? It just makes sense that they've done this, that they took those risks. But talking to people or being in the position of starting something on your own and not knowing what the outcome will be, that takes guts and that takes courage, and not everyone is geared to take that risk. To put it simply, one of my guests, Sam Falzone, is a great example of this. Right, he's turning his love of design and shoes into a concept that embodies thoughtful design, reuse, and creativity all in one with his reconstructed project. The point is that you, the listener, are an individual with their own strengths and authentic interests, and by recognizing them and owning them, your path will hopefully be illuminated. Something that's also clear from all these conversations is that there's never really perfect timing to do something. A pattern I see in someone's life is that there's these subjective, but one thing that's clear is that there really are there's never a perfect time to do something. However, something I have noticed is that there are these types of chapters in people's lives, right? It's subjective chapters. It's all dependent on you, and you kind of know when one is ending, one is starting. I start a new job, you get laid off, you start a new relationship, or move to a new city, or just something changes, and you just know that you're ready to take a next step in life somehow, some way. I think a lot of people find these subjective chapters and look for the moments in between to make that jump or take the plant the seeds for that new business, that new project of theirs. I think the issue of money is always a tough one and gets people hung up. There's this misconception from society that to start something means you won't have any money or income for a long time. Then all of a sudden you'll become a millionaire when you guys succeed, right? But in the reality, it's something a lot more nuanced. Depending on the type of business you start, the capital requirements are a lot lower, and the ability to generate an income comes a lot sooner than one thinks. Albeit not a lot always at the beginning specifically, but enough for you to be able to focus on the business and not necessarily where your next check is coming from. I really love this point that James McGough mentioned in our conversation about this exact topic. Let's take a look.
One time said something really wise, and they were like, "We don't want you to stress about money. We want you to stress about the business." Mm-hmm. And so I think that the business is an entity that needs to support its expenses. You are one of those expenses. Mm-hmm. You don't have to be a huge expense, but to not pay yourself should not be seen as a glorified place to be for too long, because it means that the business is not really operating with full transparency over its expenses. So I think you want to, once you commit to trying to build something, I think you do want to bake in your salary as a line item. Even if you mm-hmm. dial it way down, you want it to be there. I think there's something a little bit too raw about like, oh, here's the company and here's me. I don't pay myself, but I'm also giving a lot of free service to the company. Yeah. It's got to stand on its own.
On this exact topic, I really love Beto Bina's comments he made in our last conversation, where he discusses the emotional reward of entrepreneurship.
If someone is thinking about how can I change and do my own business, I'm going to earn like 20% that I was earning before, just do it, because the gratitude is so big that it's not about the money at the end.
One thing that has been great about this season is being able to speak to people from all over in different industries and sectors, really showing the diverse opportunity out there. In the next season, we'll be speaking to entrepreneurs across the entire value chain to understand the opportunities, the impacts, and what's next for the industry as a whole. Much to come. Thank you again for your time, and all the best.